All right, I think we're ready to get started. Good evening.
Take roll.
So welcome to the first Planning Commission meeting of the year for the City of Palo Alto on January 29th, 2020. We'll do, where's Vin? We'll do a roll call. You're going to do it. All right, so.
Chair Riggs.
Present.
Vice Chair Alchuk.
Present.
Commissioner Hechtman.
Present.
Commissioner Lowing.
Present.
Commissioner Rupavar.
Present.
Commissioner Suma.
Present.
Commissioner Templeton.
Present.
Thank you.
All right, the first item is if anyone has any, I don't have any speaker slip, but if there's anyone that wants to communicate on things that aren't on the agenda, they can speak to that now. Seeing no one jumping right up, we will move on. So I don't have any suggested additions, deletions from the agenda. We're light today, so I guess we'll turn it over to staff with reports, meeting schedules, assignments, and I think Amy, some of this may, just in full disclosure, some of this, we have an election tonight, so some of this may get fleshed out after we have a new chair. But I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Yeah, Rachel Tanner is not available tonight. She gave me something to report out during this segment, and I believe I left it on my desk, so shame on me. Basically, here we are. We have some interesting items coming up in the upcoming months. I spoke with our transportation official today. It looks like they're moving forward on the position for parking manager, and so looking towards coming back with a study session on the RPP program. And so that would be towards the end of February. We have some other items that'll be of interest, including the update on the comprehensive plan implementation and housing element implementation. How are we doing on our goals and policies and programs? That's coming forward. See, there was another thing that was happening as well. Well, certainly we'll be coming back with the permanent ordinance for accessory dwelling units. The council recently adopted an urgency interim ordinance January 13th to address state law that became effective January 1st. So the Planning and Transportation Commission will be involved in that process in the next several months, in the spring.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
About is there like a designated individual who's the brains for all questions for ADUs? I feel like I've gotten so many questions about ADUs that I'd love to be able to be like, contact so-and-so.
Well, there's, I'm not sure they're the brains, but there's the brawn maybe that will be, collating and processing additional nuances and questions. For the January 13th ordinance that was adopted, that's effective until January 31st of 2021. That was the work of our city attorney's office and some staff help to surgically make sure that we're not out of compliance with the state law. Going forward, there'll be, again, some teamwork there. You're welcome to send folks to me and I can filter that down.
Yeah, I was going to suggest maybe like an FAQ page or something, because I'm sure maybe some of the questions are pretty repetitive, but I don't know.
Yes, yes. So yeah, we're working on some outreach. We're going to have a web page that's going to have some information there, and as we move forward with the permanent ordinance where there's some nuances that will be discussed further, that will be coming forward. Let's see.
So maybe I can chime in because I think I talked through some of these with Ms. Tanner as well. I think there's the co-working office model that we're going to schedule, as well as the SB 50 update. Those are in the agenda packet. But also, I think we've talked about seeing the Coverly project again. I haven't heard an update on that. And also, I think this commission has expressed a desire to get the San Antonio, there's been a couple of San Antonio projects to get them back in. And so keeping us surprised of when we can expect those would be really, I think, of interest to all of us. At least when we heard those the first time, there was a lot of interest in those.
I had a follow-on question.
Yeah, Commissioner Lam, yeah.
We had the first Transportation Committee, Commission, or whatever he's called now, Office, sorry. First Office of Transportation presentation to us in August, where they reviewed the 35 recommendations that had gone to them to be kind of pre-processed and come back to us. And haven't heard a thing since our August 28th meeting on that. And I think it went from council on sort of April-ish. So we're coming up on 9 months since the council said PTC has to look at this. So if we could figure out where that is, that'd be great.
All right, seeing no other lights, and I'll just note that we do need, we have our meeting schedule on page 6 in the packet, and one of the things that we'll be refining, and I validated this with Ms. Tanner yesterday, was that we would be refining some of the 2020 council assignments, so once we have new leadership. Any other questions or comments? Okay, Commissioner Lawing?
In that regard, someone pointed out to me that 4/8 is the first day of Passover, so.
Okay, so we'll leave that to the new leadership
Yeah,
to
just wanted to point it out.
massage the schedule.
Sure.
Questions, any other questions, comments? Commissioners? Okay. So with that said, I think we will move to our study session. And before we do that, I believe we have a presentation from staff. And just to remind commissioners, there's no action on this item. This is, we've seen this before, there won't be any action, and we will be seeing this again. So hopefully we can make it efficient both times. So that's it. Take it away.
This is Samuel Gutierrez, who will be presenting the report.
Good evening to the PTC. Tonight we have a presentation on staff suggestions for changes to the Municipal Code, Chapter 18.52, which involve parking regulations. Again, the purpose here is to get input from the PTC on 5 aspects of parking lot regulations. Originally, we were seeking to draft an ordinance and bring that to you, but there were some changes with state law as of January 1st that required staff to adapt that path that we were on, and also we wanted to present what the state law requires now, which wasn't presented to the PTC previously when you discussed this back in March of last year. So focusing on the project steps, again, this is draft ordinance and code changes. We seek to return to the PTC in February for consideration before recommendation to council, and then we will present that recommendation to council following that future hearing in February. Here's an overview of what we're going to focus on tonight. Again, the 5 aspects of proposed changes to parking lot regulations. 1 involves ADA parking spaces. These are the accessible spaces. 2 involves the EVSC and ADA combined together. And again, that is a state law tweak that happened at the first of this year, and we had to kind of change direction per that state law. The next one has to do with EVSC retrofitting. So this is separate from ADA. It has to just do with EVSC charging parking spaces for standard stalls. The next one is substitution of bicycle parking for vehicular spaces. And finally, restriping and maintenance of existing parking lots. So jumping ahead here to the accessible spaces, this is just standard accessible spaces, non-electric. Staff is proposing to bring new code language to formalize the current practice of allowing reductions of required parking spaces to existing sites to allow compliance with state requirements. And that would be within PC 52.030. The proposed language is shown here, which is also shown in the staff report. This would be inserting a new language to just show that the city which again, we've been doing in practice, is consistent with state law, and we would allow a reduction in existing parking lots, even if they're not compliant per parking ratio, to become compliant as far as accessibility requirements, because that is, of course, coming from a higher authority than the city to require those. The next code suggestion is EVSC and ADA spaces. Now, this focuses on the code language that we had to modify because of state law that was effective January 1st this year. The state law requires that we count EV ready and EV installed accessible spaces that are van accessible as 2 parking spaces. This is sourced from Assembly Bill 1100 by the state. The state found that per the state goals of having a lot of electric vehicle infrastructure throughout the state to promote the switch from fossil fuel vehicles to electric vehicles, a lot of jurisdictions were not counting these accessible spaces. They were deducting it from the total because the van accessible area results in a loss of a standard stall. So what the state did was require all jurisdictions within the state of California to count them as 2 parking spaces towards a requirement. So we had to adjust that in our draft ordinance. Also, there's state law that says that we have to count a standard parking stall, a standard EV parking stall, so not associated with accessible, as 1 space. In Palo Alto, we've always done that. We've never differentiated whether it's an electric vehicle parking stall or a gas vehicle parking stall. It's 1-to-1. They're apples to apples. But again, in compliance with state law, we wanted to formalize that with some language so it's clear in the code to everyone who reads our code. And here's just a snippet of the proposed language that suggests counting accessible spaces twice, and of course counting standard electric vehicle spaces as 1 parking stall towards a requirement. Now we're moving along to retrofitting. So this is purely separate from the accessible spaces. When existing sites are seeking to retrofit, there's a lot of problems that come with that. The existing sites, you have property owners or new tenants that are moving into spaces, they're upgrading the facilities to meet their needs now, or even state requirements per green building codes, and they have to accommodate electrical vehicle chargers on their site. Often the problem is these sites are legal non-conforming, grandfathered in from long ago, and they're not meeting today's standards. So to introduce a new element to these parking lots is difficult for staff and for the applicants because there is no room, physically no room. The other problem that you run into, if there is room for these chargers to fit in, the sites are often under capacity in terms of their electrical service. So when they have to upgrade that electrical service on site, that means a new transformer has to come or other associated utility equipment. And then that equipment also, where do you put that? So then it becomes an issue again. And the current code language does not allow for any increase in noncompliance or creation of noncompliance. So to resolve these issues and line up with a lot of our comp plan policies and goals, staff is suggesting some changes to the code. But to get in greater detail here, you can see this is just a mock-up of an existing parking lot. This is in the staff report, but I wanted to be clear to show you what happens here. So in the blocked area, you have these wheel stops. Previously, they're located here in the hashed area, and then they have to be adjusted because they're introducing new equipment here. This would be the chargers, and that's blown up here. So you can see the chargers, and they need bollards for collision protection. When you do that, you can notice here the existing wheel stop was here before and then got pushed back so they could not collide with the EV equipment and the bollards. The issue with that is the wheel stop isn't the full extent of how we count parking stall because of this factor. The wheel stop actually stops the car, but the vehicle overhangs. And if you introduce this element here, which is a mock-up of EV equipment with the bollards, typically the bollards go here. So if you have a vertical impediment introduced here, then that car sticks out of the space more. And then, again, if everything's to the minimum standard, it's a domino effect down the row. And that's where staff struggles to accommodate these required EV equipment. So with that said, now we're moving to the other element. Even if we could get around the EV charger and bollards, now we have these transformers, which you can see in these photos, they're rather large. In these examples, you could see that these transformers are located in areas where there's planting strips that are sizable. But that's not always the case. So if these planting strips aren't there, or there's a conflict with a large mature tree, then they cannot go there, and then we run into issues again. Where do we put this upgraded service equipment? So to address that, we're proposing code changes that would allow a reduction in parking spaces, total parking spaces. So then you could take that, remove parking space, and rearrange, restripe to, one, accommodate wider stalls, and then the bollards and the equipment, the charging equipment, can go into that space now, and also provide an area, a pad of asphalt where that used to be a parking space for the transformer. Moving on to the next topic, the substitution of bicycle parking for vehicle parking. We want to allow bicycle parkings to be installed in place of vehicle parking spaces. Up to a certain amount of parking can be replaced with vehicle parking. That's what we're trying to find a ratio for. And this would actually mimic language that was previously in our code but was removed for an undetermined reason in 2007. So it existed prior, and now, based on the current comp plan policies, which are identified in the staff report, we need to move towards that direction again. This is just an example of, a one bicycle set of bicycle parking spaces in a space that was for a vehicle. We could mimic this, or we could distribute the bicycle racks throughout the site, but this is just to show you one car might be removed, but then you gain about 8 bicycle spaces in that same space. So that could have been 8 possible single occupancy vehicles, but now it's 8 bicycles, which again, comply with a lot of the policies of our comp plan. So again, the proposed language that we're looking is a bit of a tweak on the original language that was previously in the code. It allows for long-term or short-term bicycle facilities to be substituted for a vehicle space up to 5% of the required stalls for the site, or at least one space, whichever is greater. The exact number of substituted bicycle facilities would be a minimum of 4 short-term bicycle parking spaces per single vehicle space, although the director may require more than that minimum given site conditions if it allows for additional bicycle parking spaces. I do want to be sure that it's clear that staff was looking at this and considering smaller parking lots that may not be, able to accommodate that 5% maximum. If you do a calc of 5% and you introduce one, it's really, you need 20 parking spaces to even reach a 5% maximum. So parking lots that have 11 parking spaces couldn't take advantage of this unless we added the clause of at least one space. So at least those smaller ones could also take advantage of this. And that was in the thought of certain areas around Cal Ave, which are very close to the train station, or even downtown again, which is close to the downtown Cal train station. The fifth item that's pertaining to code changes is about restriping and maintenance of existing parking lots. So regular maintenance and resurfacing of lots requires restriping. There is a need to allow the director to make adjustments when restriping to accommodate conforming parking spaces and other types of new waste management facilities like trash enclosures, even if it would result in the loss of parking space. We do have requirements for our stormwater protection to have covered trash enclosures. A lot of existing sites, again, don't have that. They just have the trash bins on the outside, and that isn't meeting the regulations for the region or for the city. So if we allowed restriping of parking lots, and then we maybe lose 3 spaces to create a covered trash enclosure and then be all compliant, then that would be a good thing overall. And also, there have been situations that staff have observed, projects that have come in for restriping, and we see that there's non-compliances that have been grandfathered in, and they are problems with, we see problems with circulation. So turning radiuses may not be sufficient. We would never approve it that way today. Parking stalls might be too narrow, and it creates a difficult situation just for visitors to those sites. So it would be a good benefit to be able to maybe lose some spaces, again, that are not compliant, to create a very compliant parking facility that then has better circulation overall. And here's a bit of the proposed language. It would allow a director's adjustment for parking lot restriping. The language that we seek is to allow the director to approve a reduction of on-site parking spaces to achieve compliance with state law, the city's waste management objectives, and on-site circulation, or to adjust existing substandard stall dimensions to meet current codes. It's important that we're only seeking to apply this to sites that are existing and are going to remain mostly intact in terms of the existing development. So this wouldn't be a demolition of a building and then they get to keep their non-compliant parking lot. In that scenario, they would need to make everything compliant, but these are for sites that are restriping and keeping the building, maybe restuccoing or something like that minor. So with that in mind, we also are cognizant of that some of these proposed code changes for this restriping and maintenance, if given to the director, could have some possible negative side effects that we hadn't foreseen. So staff is analyzing that, and we're looking to avoid that and abate that as much as we can to the extent feasible. Things that came to mind may be long-standing existing PCs from the 70s or 80s that had different code regulations and now they're not compliant, or again, sites that were previously approved by major architectural review, and normally they would go again for these proposed changes. So we're still working on how do we abate those issues. The other conflict that we thought that might be there would be with the downtown parking assessment district and the parking in lieu fees, and how we would manage these restriping and loss of parking spaces in the downtown area where you could pay for in lieu fees. So we drafted a bit of a tweak of language there to kind of address that issue that we identified. Focusing back on this discussion here and what staff seeks as a PTC's input is for the first item is what is PTC's thoughts on counting the accessible spaces as 2? We could apply that state requirement to count the EV accessible spaces twice to just the standard accessible spaces. So it's just an easy code and there's no difference between the two. We also would like to receive feedback from the PTC on if we should, for these other suggested code changes, lean more towards director's adjustments so we could have more of a specialized adjustment per site conditions, or should we have more fixed ratios or percentages for sites, kind of a one-size-fits-all? So if this PTC could be so kind to provide us some feedback and have a discussion on some of these points, it'd be great. And that concludes staff's presentation.
All right, questions or comments from the commissioners? Oh, actually, we actually have public comment, don't we? Yeah, okay, so I don't have any cards, but when you have any public comments, now's the time to make your voice.
If I have a public comment, but not on this, do I?
Sorry, just this item, yeah, okay. Okay, so seeing none, we'll bring it back to the commission. Hearing is closed. Any commissioners, questions, comments, feedback to staff? And actually, maybe I could chime in before, just to mitigate a comment. Sam, we talked before about, can you maybe explain the interplay with new buildings that have to already have to meet certain parking space requirements based on, I think you said energy efficiency yesterday, so maybe you can explain that.
Sure. So new buildings and even existing buildings, they have to meet California State Building Code standards, and that involves the Green Building Code. That's where these EVs are popping up everywhere. A part of that is you have to provide a certain number per a threshold that you might pass for occupancy, office versus retail versus restaurant, so forth. And in their existing parking lot, they have to provide these EV charging stations. New buildings have to provide new charging stations with the new development. And they also have to provide EV ready. So they kind of have to plumb or pre-wire some parking spaces, and they're noted as EV ready. That's where the EV ready language came through in the staff report. Those are for future, because the state already knows what they're going to do in the next code cycle and afterward. They're going to keep upticking. So they thought ahead, and as sites are being developed, they already have these kind of earmarked parking spaces that you just put a charger in, basically. So they already have the capacity for them. Thus, they're ready.
Thanks. Any questions or comments from commissioners? Okay, Commissioner Lawing.
Yeah, I didn't know if you wanted lights. So I think you want us to address this slide, but I have some other questions before that, if that's okay?
Sure, but I'm happy to answer any questions. The slide is just intended to kind of, be an overview of what we're looking for.
Okay, my first one's sort of a three-part question. I'm going to ask it all at once because you can answer it however you want. So it's sort of, is there any indication from the state that they're going to give cities individual quotas on this or not relative to the overall needs? And the second question is, when you're forecasting our needs for doing this, what's the numbers consistent with the predicted overall state usage? Because I know we're very high, like the best in the state in terms of electrical usage. And then thirdly, do I understand that the total number of potential grant money is 10.8 million, the 9.8 plus 1? Was that the right number? And so whatever it is, the question is, how far does that money go to satisfy all the needs that you're projecting that we have?
Okay, so I'll start with your first question, which is about if the state has some type of requirement or goal, I guess similar to like housing numbers.
Exactly.
Not that I'm aware of. The state has a goal for the entire state to have the infrastructure, meaning that they want 200,000 plus by a certain date throughout the state, but it's not allocated in the same way towards the cities. What they are predicating the cities to meet that number by is this, any new development that triggers a threshold in the Green Building Code to then require the EV parking spaces. And then again, or even tenant improvements that exceed a certain evaluation threshold have to now install EV chargers. So it covers new development and existing improvements to sites.
That's what I expected. Otherwise, it would be mandating where electric cars have to be. But I just wanted to clarify that point.
Right, and then that's difficult because the state does know that people are moving in these cars, so it's a bit more organic. Where the new development is or renovations, that's where cars are going to go.
Okay.
And to the number forecasts, your second question, are you referring to our forecast as in user shifting to electric vehicles?
Net, how many of these stations are we going to need in the city by X dates?
That I'm not sure about. I could try to research it and bring that back at the future hearing. But the best to my knowledge, we don't have forecasts for that. I do know that we are number one in the country for EV vehicle usage. and sales, sales. So, and anyone who walks around downtown Palo Alto could see Teslas or other electric vehicles everywhere.
So the answer to the third question is we don't know either, because we don't know how much money it's going to take, since we don't know how many stations we need.
Correct.
But this grant money is it a total of 10.8? Did I read that correctly?
I believe so. In the staff report, it is 10.8.
Were you reading that in the
packet.
prior staff report from last year's
No.
study session? Or is that in this?
This staff report.
Okay.
It was 9.8, and then they added $1 million, so I presume that was an additive situation. So we don't know how that, what kind of a dent that's going to make in our
So you're on
needs.
packet page 10.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's
9.548 over the next 4 years. Added to,
I don't think you know, so we can't really dwell on that.
go ahead.
Yeah, well, we could research that further. I'm actually not sure of the metrics on that. But the grant money is to support upgrading facilities.
Okay. I mean, since we have to do this by state law and it takes money, then we got to figure out where we're going to get the money. And I'm just trying to figure out how close we are to solving our overall problem.
It's possible there's a link to the utilities staff report on packet page 10 as well in that
Okay.
same paragraph, so possibly that report could
Okay.
provide more data for you.
I'll check that. And then just a quick question. Within these, either by local law or landlord, can it be restricted how long a given car is hooked up to the station? So if it was 8 hours, then the next person could come for 8 hours, the next person could come for 8 hours, and so in 24 hours in one space, 3 cars could get done. Do you do any of those kinds of calculations?
So I know that some jurisdictions do that, and the actual charging parking stall is noted with that. It says once charge isn't complete, you must vacate. We don't have that practice in Palo Alto at the moment. By code requirement, it could be that, for example, maybe the shopping center might have that. But as far as the other sites where this is being installed, they're usually either commercial or retail spaces, so people are parking and then getting out and shopping and then they leave, or they're office buildings, they're job spaces, so then people are there for 8 hours and then they leave and go home.
So I'm asking it now in the context of this new law that you're putting together. Should Palo Alto have some control over how many cars can use that in a given 24-hour period? Because you could obviously, theoretically, reduce the number of stations necessary if you required, turnover in the spot. So that'd just be something I'd raise for your consideration as to putting it in the ordinance.
Certainly, it's something for public parking lots that should be a conversation. For private parking lots, I'm not sure where that would enter in, but certainly we'll discuss it.
Yeah. Okay, and then on one of your questions here, I don't think I'm quite in sync with the substitution of bicycle parking for vehicle spaces. Particularly when you look at something like ADA, it's not going to be the same user, probably, that uses a bike instead of a car. And I fully understand why we need an ADA kind of space for access to to that driver. But it doesn't seem like that's correlating with the same sort of person user if we're just using some other space for incremental bikes. I mean, I understand what you're trying to do, let other people, quote, park there, although they have to park in a bike instead of a car, so it raises all the classic issues of rain and et cetera, et cetera. But I guess I just think that's a pretty loose correlation.
I might expound on that as far as the prior code that did include this until 2007. The prior code talked about Class 1, which is normally a bike locker, and it, contrary to the picture where it shows a bunch of bikes kind of sitting there in one spot, the code was really utilized or intended more for smaller parcels where the geometries were such that it was hard to squeeze an additional, put a parking space for vehicles, but there was extra usable area for additional bikes beyond the required bikes. that were close to the entrance of the building, let's say, so that in a downtown or someplace where, it's bicycle use near transit makes a lot of sense. There, you could squeeze bikes in places other than the parking lot, and thereby provide means for folks to use the building.
I guess my concern is that if we put out there sort of the tone of, don't worry, we'll have more parking spaces for bikes, and therefore the total parking spaces are the same, they aren't. So I'm just concerned
Yes.
about being credible with the public.
Makes sense to consider the director's adjustment as the method, which is where it used to be in the code, was related to director's adjustments. And so that would have a measured, consideration by the director.
And my last comment is just that I appreciate the awareness of and the attention to the issue of aesthetics, because while we have to comply with the law and that requires a certain amount of equipment, I'm just glad that that's part of the overall look, that if all these things just, you take down trees and put up these all over the place, we're going to have another nightmare like cell phone towers. So that should be in there somehow, being constantly attentive to ways to disguise that equipment. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Suma, followed by Commissioner Rupavar.
Thank you. So I have some questions, but I'll just kind of go through them in order. Definitely, I think with regards to ADA, AVSE, and ADA, compliant with state law, of course, we have to do that, and that's all good. I am wondering about ADA spots, if we wouldn't want them all to be compliant with EVSE, only so that people that need the parking closest to the entrance to buildings have more options. That was my only thought about that. And then with regards to the putting in the code the practice already that an EVSE is one space, I think that's fine, but in the language that you propose, you say as at least one space, and I can see how that, if one space is your intention, I can see how the as at least one space might create some confusion. Let's see, so the retrofitting, you referenced on packet page 14, 1870, 090, and 080, which are the general non-compliant facility and maintenance repair rules. But I just wanted to clarify that you're not intending on changing that portion of the code.
It was not in the draft that we began to prepare for this meeting, that we didn't bring forward, but it's something that, often we have references in one part of the code to another part of the code, so to the extent that if that's needed with respect to parking lots, we might consider addressing that. Because right now, non-complying facilities, it's not specific to parking lots or buildings, so.
So you might consider changing it in the later, in 1852, but also have an exemption explicit in the general law.
It could be a reference in that non-complying facilities portion of the zoning code that refers to parking lots and sends you to the other chapter, perhaps.
Okay, thank you. With regards to substituting vehicle parking spots for bike parking lots, I would think that maybe if we're finding that we're falling short of our bicycle requirements, we might want to change the general requirement. I don't know that, but it sounds like that's where you were going. And I'm not sure that switching a vehicle one, when we have standards for that and areas of the city that frankly are very much in need of every parking spot they have on private sites and on street parking and city parking lots. So the substitution aspect seems a little odd for me. Seems like it would be prudent to change the bicycle requirement if that is actually inadequate as people use bikes more. And I will mention that the DMV data that we have, and maybe we'll get new data, soon doesn't show a reduction in use of cars, and sadly, our public transportation, we do show reductions in that use. So that seems like a funny trade-off to me, though I would like cars to have, I would like there would be an opportunity for ample bicycle parking. And for long-term bike parking, I have a preference for it to be accommodated inside a building or a shed or something for people who are using their bike as a commuting vehicle, so it just stays safe and dry. And the restriping, I think, is fine. It's just an attempt to bring an opportunity to bring parking lots in existing buildings into compliance. So that seems fine with me. So, and I agree that with Commissioner Lowing's comments, it would be interesting to know the answer to some of those questions going forward. So that's it for now. Thank you.
Commissioner Rupavar.
So let me give you a little bit of background as to how I'm looking at this. When I think of, buildings or parking, I think we should take a holistic approach and think not just 2 years, 3 years, 4 years ahead, but more like 10, 15, 20, 30 years ahead. What's the landscape going to look like? And if we're going to revise things now, let's look at everything big picture. And where I'm coming at this with is from a perspective in real estate. So in buildings a lot right now, I'm seeing a lot of artificial intelligence, smart devices, these sorts of things getting embedded in buildings. However, then the issue that you run into is 3, 4, 5 years from now, or even before those products are out on the market, that technology has become obsolete. So when we look at something like parking, that's the lens I'm looking at it with. And I'm wondering, is it possible that these EV stations that we're now putting in place are going to become obsolete in 2, 3, 4, 5 years? Should we think about it differently and anticipate what's coming, and the fact that we're also trending towards more electric vehicles? Get ready for that in the way that we plan for the use of our space. So I just wanted to comment, let's think about that stuff too. Maybe there's a way where we can be proactive about things to come rather than reactive and working in piecemeal fashion to fix things. That's my only comment.
Okay, Commissioner Templeton.
I generally like most of these proposals. I have a question about the restriping. Is this motivated because people want to make these changes, but they would become non-compliant or lose spaces and not be able to implement the upgrades to their parking lot? Is that one of the things that's driving this?
That is one. It is applicant-driven and also staff-driven, because we do, again, have these code requirements for trash enclosures, for example, or even trees. We have a lot of parking lots that don't meet the current requirement of every 10 parking spaces. You need a tree planter aisle or space, so they're just vacant of vegetation at all. And that's not good for heat island effect. That's not good for aesthetic purposes either. So they're able to continuously just restripe and keep that condition, where we would prefer to see trees on sites to make them more aesthetically pleasing as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, I support that. And regarding the bicycle parking, a place where I used to work did this. They converted, depending on the size of the parking lot, 1 or 2 spaces to bike parking, and it was really effective and very satisfying to drive your bike from building to building instead of driving your car. So I'm supportive of it in general. I share the concerns of some of the other commissioners have brought up about making sure that the trade-offs, map out appropriately. But in general, I think it's an interesting idea. Maybe just a little bit more detail on the trade-offs. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to jump in and make a comment first. So I just, one comment I wanted to chime in, one was kind of similar to some of the stuff was said, but it feels to me like we should be looking for some case studies or best practice on this, particularly with regard to use type and land use intensity. And I say that particularly with regard to I think the ratios may need to vary based on use type or land use intensity. I didn't see that anywhere in the report. But also the bike, I mean, clearly you may have different levels of need for substitution for bike parking based on use type, use location, use intensity. So on that aspect, it just might be good to see how other cities in California have dealt with this, and also how they may be varying it based on land use type. I'm really sorry. I don't know how to pronounce your last name just yet. Okay, I haven't pronounced it yet. So Commissioner Heckman, that probably was easy, and so I do apologize, but I believe that's the first time I've pronounced your last name. Commissioner Helpel, welcome, and after that, Commissioner Olczak.
I'll catch up. So, and in fact, that's part of what I'm doing on this item, because I understand that the Commission has actually already seen it once and provided you some comments. So this is a refined version. So if I ask about something, some ground that's already been plowed, I apologize. And I'm just going to go sort of front to back through the report, the items that caught my eye. So I do see that the state is looking for 250,000 of these EV stations by 2025. Do we know how many EV stations we have currently in Palo Alto that are either existing, permitted and being built, or EVA ready, or EVSE ready?
I'm not sure of the total, but I could ask other staff that utilities may know, for example, so I could look into that.
Okay. I do think it would be a good idea for us to have a target to sort of know how we're doing in adding these. I ran some kind of basic math comparing our population to the state population. That would give us an obligation, if you will, to have 424 of these EVSE stations. Now, that doesn't account for the fact that the electric vehicles are far more popular here than they are in other places. So I would say that kind of 425 number would be our floor, and that realistically we're going to need a lot more than that. And as another commissioner pointed out, I think in the future the proportion of electric vehicles is only going to increase. And so I think we do have to be proactive and look at those issues long term. So on page 5 of the report, there is some proposed language in the middle of the page that would go into 18.52.040. And as one of the commissioners pointed out, a couple times we use the term, the phrase "at least," that if it's just an EVSE spot, it will count as at least one parking space. If it's an accessible space that has an EVSE component, then it would be at least 2. And I do think it might be useful to the public and developers who are looking at this language, to give them some kind of guidance in the language so that they would know, well, who decides what the at least is and what are the factors. So that's something I'd like staff to think about, whether there's a way to give a little more guidance in the text there. And then just below that paragraph, in part of the staff report, it says several jurisdictions have been counting charging spaces as 2 parking spaces for a percentage of total required parking spaces. Is staff referring there to, it says charging spaces, but is it really referring to these combined accessible EVSEs, or just straight EVSE without an ADA space?
I believe it's just the straight EVSE.
Okay.
Yeah, no association with it accessible.
All right, so in a hypothetical situation there, if I've got a parking lot with 20 spaces, I might convert those to 10 EVSE spaces, and we lose the net 10. So I was interested, because that's a possibility, I was interested in the sentence just after that that says these jurisdictions allow for up to 10% of total required parking spaces. So I'd like to ask staff to consider, as a part of this language, if we are going to count those as 2, then should there be some max? Maybe it's 10%, maybe it's more than 10%, because again, we're going to have more electric vehicles than a lot of other jurisdictions. But I'd like staff to give that some thought. Let's see. In the accessible ADA compliance, on page 6, there is proposed language staff has provided toward the top of the page, and the last sentence says, this provision applies to minor changes to existing building structures, et cetera. Do you see that language? So I'm wondering if there is another place somewhere in the code that will give guidance to people who read the code as to what a minor change is. Is that fleshed out somewhere else? Or is that going to, what we don't want, I think, is to create a lot of debates for our planning director when people come in thinking something's minor that maybe is not historically what we would consider minor. So if it's not fleshed out somewhere else, I'd ask staff to think about whether it needs a little more clarification here in the language. Turning to the bicycle parking. Actually, as I read through this, what came to my mind was the Midtown Ross Road YMCA, where they don't have any parking spaces that have been converted to bike parking because the bike parking is off the parking lot. It's actually at the entrances as you walk in, right? There's parking to the left and right, I think coming from both ways. And so, and I think that's preferable to where bike parking can be accommodated off the parking lot. That should be the first priority, so we preserve parking spaces. But and I haven't read through the whole code, and maybe that is covered someplace. But if it's not, then I do think I think that should be our intent, and it should be reflected somewhere in our code language that our city's first priority is to find an off location, off parking lot location, and only if there is not one, then to look at replacing a parking space with bike parking. In the proposed language, which is on page 11, I didn't understand the last sentence. This adjustment is exclusive of the minimum bicycle parking requirement for the site. Can you help me with that?
Well, so these would be the extra bike parking spaces beyond the minimum that has already been met.
Okay.
So exclusive meaning exclusive of the ones that they've should have provided because they're required. These are extra bike parking spaces above the required number of bike parking spaces.
And typically, will those minimum requirements have been met off the parking lot or not necessarily?
That depends on how that site was configured. It could have been that they allocated a space because there's a small walkway to a door, and those are parking spaces there. Like, again, the Midtown Shopping Center or Town and Country, you have parking that is directly in front of business spaces. So then there are sites that already have parking, inverted U's or lockers there, because that makes sense.
Yes.
In other situations, it could be again, on the walkway off of the parking lot facility itself.
Okay, thank you. And then the last item is on the restriping. And I appreciated the part of the staff report where you explained how, as part of the restriping, you can have this unintended consequence of squeezing a drive aisle, for example. And that constricts on-site circulation, which is important. And so I agree that improvements to on-site circulation should be a part of the calculus for this, but what I was concerned about is the way we've listed it in the draft language here. It's a standalone item. And so it would be conceivable that a property owner could come in and say, I want to restripe solely to, in my view, improve on-site circulation, and we're going to lose parking spaces. I think that's an unintended reading of this. And so what I would ask staff to think about is whether that concept of improvement to on-site circulation needs to be tied to at least one of the other factors. You're restriping to meet a state requirement, for example, right? And so it's an additional reason to provide flexibility rather than its own sole reason. So those are my comments. Thanks for listening to them.
Thank you so much. Commissioner Olczyk.
Okay,
Vice Chair Olczyk, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be short because many of the comments I wanted to make have been made. I'll echo some of them real quick. I do think having sort of maybe when we come back to this and definitely review it again, having some spreadsheet or table that gives us an opportunity to sort of compare what not necessarily just our neighbors are doing, but any jurisdictions that are maybe being more creative in general. Like, I'm not sure if it just has to be a California city, maybe something in Seattle. I imagine that the California cities are probably the most at the forefront of this. But so that's something that Chair Riggs mentioned. And then I want to echo a comment that Commissioner Heckman said, which if I think it would be useful to understand what factors should weigh in to the percentages, not just a minimum or a maximum. And particularly, is there some data that we can rely on? This is how many cars we anticipate being sold as a percentage of total cars being sold, which will be electric, that might help us sort of navigate. And I know that there's sort of a state code compliance component to this. So maybe it's not that we're raising a minimum, but maybe there's some element we can introduce, an incentive to, I'll give you an example. I don't think right now we require single-family homes to install an EV parking spot, but we do require that the parking spots be EV compatible, meaning they have to provide some 220, there has to be some component in the breaker box dedicated to the future electrification of the parking spot. Maybe that's something we could encourage developers who are building parking to incorporate, so they're not necessarily dedicating more than the 10 spaces or 10%, whatever the percentage is, but they are future-proofing, so that if in fact the number of electric vehicles rises substantially, during the lifetime, which I imagine it will, of the development, transitioning to electric supported parking spaces wouldn't be as cumbersome for future property owners. I also thought about the sort of location of the bikes. It didn't occur to me until I saw the picture of the shopping center off Middlefield that you used as the example of dedicating a pre-existing spot to a bicycle rack. And I'm quite familiar with that shopping center's parking lot. It's one of the more precarious ones. And I too thought about whether it made sense for us to discourage or encourage, depending on how you look at it, the location of those bike parking facilities, and whether it made sense to encourage people to sort of bike through parking lots to get to a dedicated parking area, or whether we could encourage their location maybe somewhere other than the same drive aisles that cars are often backing into. And then the last thing I thought about was the sort of a way we approach the parking stall depth question and the bollard. I think I'm using that word right. I've seen, so take for example a not an uncovered parking area, but a covered sort of walled-in parking area. Frequently, there's a bollard and there's overhang and there's a wall that you approach. And I've seen in those instances chargers that are essentially wall mounted, and they eliminate the concern or they eliminate the need to have sort of separate posts. I don't know if those are also bollards, but those posts to protect them from a car coming into them. And I wonder if, I guess one of my, and I just don't have the sort of full perspective here, but I wondered if whether in anticipating the installation of these electric charging stations, we were not taking into account maybe other creative solutions which would make that not even an issue in terms of the depth and wouldn't necessarily cause immediate drive aisle, I guess, infringement. And so I wondered if would our language be able to accommodate some flexibility in charger layout and design so that it wouldn't be too rigid and say, well, okay, if you build an EV spot, that spot has to be a little deeper because we anticipate this is the only charger you're going to use. I mention this because the last time I went to Tokyo, I had the most insane experience where a gas pump came from the ceiling, and I thought to myself, like, there's not even a pump on my left and right? So I anticipate that as they continue to retrofit buildings over time, we'll see more and more unique executions of these chargers, and I just want whatever text we come up with to sort of have the flexibility to accommodate those new alternative sort of designs.
Sorry, if we could keep it down in the audience, it's really distracting up here with all the chatter. So if we can keep it down a little bit, that'd be great.
Okay, that's all my comments. I look forward to seeing this again. And I'll, I can commit to saying that I probably will also spend some time trying to figure out, like, what is like the most cutting edge, planning strategies with respect to this. Are there garages somewhere in Europe where they're just all electric, or, so I think it would be interesting to sort of find out if developers of, let's say, luxury residential buildings, are they already electrifying every spot? I think it would be curious maybe if we reached out to a few of them just to see, like, what's happening out there from not just a planning perspective, but from a market perspective. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
All right. If I may, we've actually encountered the specific situation that you're referring to with the wall-mounted chargers. Typically, those have kind of a rope around electrical loom that you use, and those typically only have one charger per space. Most of the applicants that we encounter who are applying to install those don't want that particular model because they only get one charger cord per unit. Also, that requires a wall to be there, so that isn't a situation in most of the instances that we're seeing these being added. If they already have an underground garage and they were to wall mount them, we do allow them because they could be mounted above what we call the hood clearance area. So if they're able to be mounted 5 feet up, then they would clear a hood of a vehicle, even an SUV, and then that would be fine. Also, in that scenario with the parking structure, there would be support beams at some point at the start of a parking stall. Just like downstairs in this building. So at that point, you could actually put the charger behind there, and those are methods that we've encouraged applicants already to try because the structural support for the structure already is a bollard, and we don't have a collision issue, and that space is usually much larger than the charger itself.
Yeah, no, I feel like I didn't want to mention this because I don't know if it's true, but I feel like I've read, I may be making this up, about, there's some movement in the industry to create, like a wireless charging mats that you essentially can ride on. I just think there's potentially a lot of change that we'll see in this, and I just wanted to sort of, not necessarily tying you just to the wall-mounted ones, but to encourage us to think as creatively as possible about the way we draft it so that we don't necessarily have to keep revising it in case these things change dramatically. But thank you for responding.
Anybody else? Good, so hopefully, this is a short item when it comes back to us. So thank you for the wait. You got what you needed? All right. So thank you. So we have 2 more items. First, approval of the minutes, item 3, item 4.
Through the chair.
Okay.
I have my piece of paper for if it's possible to do director's report items, because I don't want to let that get lost in the shuffle to go backwards.
To go backwards, okay.
Yeah. I
course.
just didn't want to miss an opportunity, so time
Awesome.
sensitive.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. So we're back on director's report to finish up there. You're invited to participate in the Urban Land Institute's Urban Plan for Communities. This will take place on Wednesday, March 18th, 2020, and is hosted by the City of Cupertino. Urban Plan is a workshop on real estate and land use. The workshop introduces its participants to the trade-offs and risks at play in the entitlement and negotiation process associated with real estate development, especially in public-private partnerships. This will be an interactive all-day training beginning at 8:30 a.m., registration and breakfast, until approximately 4:30 p.m. Breakfast, snacks, and lunch will be provided. So if you're interested, we can accommodate signing you up and all of that. So let us know. The deadline to confirm it is this week. So time sensitive. Please let me know if you have an interest in attending, and we'll handle the registration. So have a look at your calendars maybe during the meeting, and let me know if you can at the end of this meeting or tomorrow. Give us a call. Couple more items on the looking ahead. I neglected to mention changes to the wireless ordinance. There's been a couple of correspondences that you've received. The council did make changes in December 2019 to our standards, and we're going to be bringing forward this ordinance for Planning Commission's consideration and recommendation. That's coming up in the spring. I think there was another one about, we're going to have results of our study examining our below market rate policy in the city. Also, we'll be having a study session on the North Ventura Coordinated Area Plan to bring the Planning Commission up to date on the draft alternatives. Finally, we are continuing to work to fill vacancies. We posted a land use planner position this week. That's in the data team section for mapping and data analysis. I know data and maps are what we need. So thought you might be interested to hear about that. Thank you.
Can I make a quick comment?
Sorry, Commissioner Olczyk.
Yeah, so just really quick, I want to add this planning, the event that Mrs. French mentioned tonight. At the same event last year, former mayor, current councilwoman Nis, myself, and then Commissioner Monk attended, and it's exclusively for appointed and elected officials. So I sat at a table, we each sat at a different table. I sat at a table with planning commissioners from Menlo Park, planning commissioners from San Mateo, mayors of various cities, Redwood City and I think Belmont. And so it's actually really, if you're considering it or you're on the fence, it's really, really great. You'll network with people all over the peninsula, and you'll participate in a program where you're assigned one of several roles. You could be a community member, you could be a decision maker, you could be a developer in a sort of staged event, and you have to grapple with many issues that don't play the role of planning commissioner, branch out. But anyways, so I really, it was very, very productive. The city paid for us to attend. It was really great.
I went last year too. It was amazing. I highly recommend it.
I'm signed up.
Excellent. Okay. Enough to chat. Let's move on.
And then, I'm sorry, one more, which is the housing work plan. Forgot to mention that. February 3rd, this is going to City Council. It had appeared on the council agenda, but was not considered a week ago. But if you're interested, hopefully you have that staff report.
All right. We're going to fast forward now back to where we were in the agenda. Thank you, Ms. French. All right, so 2 action items. First, approval of minutes. I do not have any comment cards. If you have a comment on item 3 or 4, I need that comment card. Any comment cards on item 3 or 4, please get them in. I see something coming in. Is that item 3? Okay. Okay, okay, so,
Do you want someone to make
okay, if you,
a motion to approve the minutes?
we need to see who's got comments. I believe there may be a comment card in the comment box that our colleague. So. Thank you very much for working with us here. All right, so really appreciate you guys submitting this. So we're going to go back to item 1. I'm going to reopen the oral communications for things not on the agenda. Thank you for being here, Ms. Juarez. You've got 3 minutes to tell us what you want.
Great. Sorry for missing the oral
worries, no
communication
worries.
things
Don't worry.
earlier. So I'm a resident of Palo Alto, and I was just coming here because I wanted to raise an issue on the traffic light timing on University Avenue. So when you're coming or entering off the Bayshore Highway, there's 2 lights. There's one there, and then there's one like 200 feet beyond that at Woodland. And the timing of those 2 lights is very poorly timed so that not enough cars can get through. And because it's such a short space, only a couple cars can fit there. So what happens is since the lights aren't timed, there's a long backup either on University Avenue or on the other side of the highway. And I just wanted to raise to see if anything could be done about that. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks for coming out. I appreciate that.
All right, thanks.
Okay, so I'll close the hearing now again on, I think, okay, no, but, no, we cannot.
Thank you.
Sorry, we can't respond to that, but staff will, I mean, I think this is the point, is that we've heard you. Thank you for being here. All right, so seeing no comments on item 3, we have our December 11th draft PTC minutes. Hope you had a chance to review. Do I have a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve.
So a motion to approve, Commissioner Rupivar, second by Commissioner Alchek. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any abstain?
Abstain.
Okay, so approved, 6 with 1 abstention. Okay, moving on. We have administrative item in terms of our committee structure of electing a chair and vice chair. I have 3 comment cards. So we will hear from Terry Holzheimer, followed by Margaret Heath, followed by Ms. Winter Dolmbach.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'd like to read a short letter that has come from Palo Alto citizens that we sent to you this past Monday. I'm positive that you've had a chance to read it, but I think it's also important that it be transparent and visible to the entire community, especially those that are watching right now. We, the residents of Palo Alto, request that all planning and transportation commissioners take into account the following key characteristics when nominating and voting for this year's chair and vice chair. Number 1, selfless interest in serving the public good and carrying out the work of the people. Punctual and regular attendance at meetings. Thorough preparation for each agenda item, including knowledge of relevant background. The utmost respect and courtesy toward the public, especially those that come out in the evening. Its right of participation and the commissioner's role to thoroughly vet items adhering to the commissioner's role and on the public's behalf. Zero tolerance of bullying or disparaging a member of the public from the dais. Respectful interaction with colleagues. a commitment to transparency, including compliance with state-required complete disclosure at the dais of any conflict of interest and the resultant recusal from participation. Full compliance with disclosure requirements in quasi-judicial hearings, including disclosure of contact with any or all parties involved, as well as providing the substance of new and pertinent information from those contacts that are not part of the public record. Respectful interaction with staff in private, for example, when setting agendas, as well as during public meetings. Full disclosure of any interaction with staff on personnel matters that may overlap with the work of the commission. Managing fair and open and productive meetings by preserving the order and decorum at the dais. Curbing behavior that is not in alignment with the highest ethical standards. Allowing adequate time for members of the public to speak. Permitting each commissioner an opportunity to ask questions before any motions are made. Keeping discussions on topic and moving by encapsulating key ideas and being as clear and as brief as possible. And finally, seeking areas of common ground when possible. I urge you to look at these guidelines and consider them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Margaret Heath.
Yes. Good evening. Maggie Heath from College Terrace, and I'm an endorser of the community letter that you have received. It also lists 53 other resident endorsers across neighborhoods in the document that you received from Becky Sanders on Monday. Among them are several who have served as a council, board, and/or commission member, and I'd like to mention these. Emily Renzel and Joe Hirsch both were chairs of the Planning Commission before its name and purview changed in 2000. Emily Renzel, as well as another Palo Alto legend, Enid Pearson, both served on the City Council. Karen Holman was a two-term chair on the Planning and Transportation Commission, and then council member and mayor. Former City Council member and mayor Eureka Kishimoto, as well as former council member Greg Schmid, are also endorsers. Jennifer Hetterly, former Parks and Recreation Commissioner and Chair, has endorsed, as has Greer Stone, former Human Relations Commissioner and Chair. Since this letter, together with the initial endorsers, which were sent to you on Monday, we have received additional endorsements, and I'd like to mention a couple of those. Among the endorsers include former Planning and Transportation Commissioner and Vice Chair Arthur Keller, and former Utilities Advisory Commissioner and Chair James Cook. Thank you to all the residents who have turned up this evening to support us and stayed late, and thank you for listening. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Ms. Heath. Winter Dollenbach.
Hi, I'm happy to be here. I just want to say, well, I know that mob there, and I like them a lot. I'm not really with them tonight. I'm speaking for myself, kind of about another thing. Expertise and knowledge. Expertise and knowledge. Expertise and knowledge. That's the gold standard in Palo Alto. I think we all know that. On City Council, on our commissions, expertise and knowledge, that's what we want. We want it for our leaders of our commissions and on our City Council. Both expertise and knowledge come with hard work and over time. I want to say I know something about this. I'm almost 75 years old. And I have noticed that that's how we accumulate this. It takes time and it takes hard work. I also know that it is when new leadership is being elected, because I sit in on a lot of city council meetings, commission meetings, or I watch them on home and TV, that there's a big scramble. Every time you all elect new people or other commissions do or whatever, you all talk to each other behind the scenes. We always hope the Brown Act isn't violated, but who knows? And people line up votes. It's kind of like Survivor at Skull Island or something sometimes. Makes me very nervous. So I don't know what you all have really planned for tonight and what you have done. But I like to think that you all are the best and the brightest. I always keep hope alive. And I hope beyond hope that you have as your highest priority expertise and knowledge in your leadership votes tonight. No matter what you've been talking about, if you have, for chair and for vice chair, because some have more expertise than knowledge than others. You will all have it. You will all get it over time and hard work, because that's how it comes. And despite political ambitions and despite alliances that you make with each other to achieve your smaller goals and personal goals, it's expertise and knowledge that the people of Palo Alto and the city of Palo Alto expect from people on our commissions, and we expect it from each and every one of you. So please do the right thing tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dillenbach. If anyone else has any comments, now's the time before I close the hearing. So, seeing none, I like to do that. Okay. We'll bring it back to the commission. So just to kind of outline the process, and we had to do a little review, a refresher of the bylaws. What will happen is we'll elect the chair, and then the chair will run the election of the vice chair, which is what we've done traditionally. It's similar to what council does. So I get to get up and participate then, which is great. But typically, for both, the process has been that we take nominations, we take all the nominations. Typically, what we've done in the past is generally the person that's nominated can accept with a simple yes, no, and the nominator will speak to their nomination. And that's typically what we do when we make motions, we speak to the motion. After we have all of the nominations, we'll go through rounds of voting until a majority is reached. And if you watch the election for mayor, that's how the council has done it too. So if I mess up, let me know. If I mess up, let me know, because in theory, I understand how this is done, but I've never run one before. So that said, I think what I will do, and we'll just do it I'll take nominations for the position.
Question?
Okay, I've got a light, so again, go ahead.
On process. I'm
Commissioner Lowen.
a little confused on point number 5, if this was really what's intended. So I understand that, because I'm not quite sure we handle it this way, but we can figure out how we want to handle it. The nomination, and then a second, and then the nominee says, yes, I want to. But what this says is that after those nominations have been made and seconded, and the nominees have accepted, then we're going to vote immediately. And I don't recall that we went immediately to a vote, because, for example, Commissioner A could make a nomination, Commissioner B could make the second, Commissioner C would say yes, and then we're done. So there's no discussion that way.
Yeah. I think that
it seems to disenfranchise commissioners that want to ask questions of the nominee or something like that.
I think at least for my tenure on the commission, we have not done that. And I don't think that's listed in our bylaws, but I think what is consistent is to actually take all the nominations up front.
Correct.
Let the nominator speak to their nomination.
Correct. My only question is, do we want to stop it after the nominees have both said yes, or do we want to be able to ask questions of the nominee?
I would have to consult with I'm sorry, I didn't have direction.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So under the commission's rules, the chair does have discretion to determine the procedures. However, but the chair can also submit it to the commission to decide whether or not his proposed procedure is acceptable to a majority of the commission. And if the chair does decide on the procedure and a member of the commission would like to appeal that, then you can also make a motion to appeal that and institute a different process.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Well, this clearly you're putting me on the spot.
That wasn't the intent at all, I can assure you that.
I don't recall that we've ever done this before, and I would prefer not to set a new precedent of basically putting a nominee on the spot with lots of questions. I don't know that that's fair, but I would entertain, if you want to make if we could want to have, vote, do a consensus show of hands that that's something we want to do, I would entertain it, but I'll just be saying, it's from my perspective, I don't feel like, I feel like it's setting a different
I don't
standard,
have any hidden agenda here, Chair.
Yeah,
I'm just saying that if somebody wanted to ask a question or say, other than the person who's seconding, I'd like to support it for these reasons, they're not going to be able to give their reasons and we'll never know. So that's all I was trying to kind of look at.
Commissioner Suma, followed by Commissioner Suma, followed by Commissioner Olczyk.
Thank you, Chair. Tonight does seem a little different to me, and I remember in the past having discussion about publicly about why we may or may not support a particular candidate. I remember speaking to your nomination last year, so I think we have typically done that, and I think that's not just for us, but it's also for the public. And unusually we don't usually have members of the public here for this, I don't think, but we did do that last year. So, because I think it's nice for people to hear reasoning behind the support we give each other for these leadership positions.
Commissioner Olczyk.
I'm prepared to make a nomination.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Becker.
Beckman.
I'm sorry. We just met, and for everybody out there, this is so awkward for me. We just met this morning, and
We'll get there.
I'm not a table talk person, so.
Really a point of order, since you do have the flexibility as the current chair to control this. I actually had a comment that I thought should precede the nominations. It's not about a particular nominee, and I was wondering if now, as we're poised for somebody to make a nomination, if I could make my...
I would welcome a comment. Sure.
All right, thank you. So, and actually what I wanted to address the community letter that was provided and that somebody was kind enough to read into the record tonight, and that a number of you, I think, are here to support. I did receive it and read it, and I think it's terrific, and I want to thank all the people in our community that participated in it and that endorsed it and that support its ideals. I do. I support those ideals, and I found myself nodding my head as I read through it. But as I read through it, I did see what I consider to be a significant omission, and so I just want to put that on the table because I do think it should be on the list, but it's not. And it really relates to characteristic number 5, which says zero tolerance for bullying or disparaging a member of the public from the dais. Now, I agree with that, but what's missing in that statement is this: zero tolerance for bullying or disparaging a member of the public by another member of the public, and zero tolerance for bullying or disparaging a member of the dais, someone on the dais, whether it's a commissioner or a member of staff, by a member of the public. In other words, in this room, I think every person has to be respectful of every other person, regardless of your role in the process. And I do think that it's the role of the chair and the vice chair to ensure that that order is maintained in all of those directions. And so that's the point I wanted to make. And whoever our chair and vice chair are moving forward, I'm confident that they will do that. Thank you.
And I want to echo that. I really appreciate you saying that, because I think I appreciated the comments as well, and I was thinking of the word civitas, or, and thinking about that we're all here to respect one another and to hear the public, but also to bring our collective expertise to inform how we live. So thank you for that, and thank you for the comments. I think that's, those are very informative. So any other comments about process? Commissioner Lally.
I guess I'm still back on the same issue, is I don't see any downside of being able to, support a motion or not. It's like we do with every other motion.
So I don't have a problem with dialoguing, but I think that the point here is, you speak, you can, I don't have a problem with doing that. We'll go through rounds of nominations. After that, you all can speak to and/or ask questions. I'm going to limit everyone to one question. We need to keep this efficient, or one item of dialogue, but I'll be responsive to that. I think you're right. Okay. No problem. Okay. I see no other lights. I will entertain nominations for the election of chair. So, and we'll take as many as need to be nominated. Commissioner Olczyk.
First, let me just say welcome. Probably should have done that at the beginning of the meeting. Your presence is already profoundly impressive, and thank you for your comment. And I'm going to make a nomination right now. It's been quite a privilege for me to serve with Commissioner Templeton. I have always been impressed with her intellect and her professionalism, and I'd like to nominate her, and then I'll speak to my nomination if it gets seconded.
Okay, Commissioner Templeton, do you accept the nomination just for start off with?
Yes.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, Commissioner Rubavar seconds. Would you like to speak to the nomination, Commissioner Olczyk?
Yeah. The reason why I'm nominating Commissioner Templeton is because if I could add one thing to this list, or, I guess if my sincere belief is that effective meeting management is the ultimate precursor of the success of this commission. I think everybody here has great experience and great knowledge, and I think we all operate with many of the values that are articulated tonight. I think it's a unique quality to be able to effectively manage a group, and sometimes it's not always the individual with the greatest expertise in traffic, for example, or law, or any area that is the best meeting manager. And so with that, I want to acknowledge that I believe Commissioner Templeton approaches the important work we do on this commission with an exceptional level-headed method of operation and a very clear sense of empathy for all who engage in our process. And I think what is most remarkable is that she reminds me so much of the late Eduardo Martinez, who served as chair when I first joined this commission. And I remember his leadership fondly because he inspired all of us on this commission to be our best selves. Like him, Commissioner Templeton, you are compassionate, you are thoughtful, and you are measured in your analysis and commentary. And you make those who come to our meetings feel welcome, heard, and considered. And for all of these reasons, I think you will make an outstanding chair, and I hope my fellow commissioners will join me in supporting your appointment.
Okay. So Commissioner Rupp, can you speak to your second?
Yes, I'd like to speak to my second. First off, thank you for submitting that letter. I did genuinely spend a lot of time thinking about the points raised in that letter and really thinking about who epitomizes those characteristics, and that is Commissioner Templeton. I've had the honor and privilege of, serving with her and stepping back. What this commission needs and what one needs of a chair is somebody who is respectful, who is organized, and who has empathy. And Commissioner Templeton embodies all three. I have gotten to know her both on the dais and in informal settings during dinners, behind the scenes, never once, and I can honestly say this, have I ever seen her be disrespectful to a member of the staff, to a fellow commission member, to a member of the public. That is not in her character. And speaking to the fact that she is extremely organized, I don't know if people know this, but she has over 20 years of experience in organizational processes and running meetings, and she knows what she's doing. And finally, the empathy, that emotional intelligence that she brings to the table, and I've seen it when she connects and interacts with people from the public who come to speak, and it's just so thoughtful in the way that she thinks about and approaches issues. So for those reasons, I seconded Commissioner Templeton's nomination, and I would be honored to have her as our chair.
Okay, thank you. I have more lights, Commissioner Suma, I have you, but I would need to know, I don't know whether or not you have comments or not, but I will entertain other nominations now that we've had if there are other nominations. So Commissioner Suma and then Commissioner Lowing. If there are no further, if you would hold your questions, if there are no further nominations, we can go into the requested questions. But if there are any other nominations, I'll entertain them now. Okay, so Commissioner Suma followed by Commissioner Lowing.
So thank you very much, and really thank you to the members of the public who came out tonight with a lot of good advice and comments to us. And it's not always easy to be perfect up here. I will be very honest. This is my 4th year on the Planning Commission. I was planning on throwing my hat in the ring for a lot of reasons. In addition to this body, I've served on several other city commissions and boards, but I am struck by some of the comments in the letters seeking areas of common ground when possible. I am struck by the good working relationship I have had with Commissioner Templeton. I sat next to her for the whole year. I was able to help her when she was a new commissioner and wasn't sure how everything worked out. I've enjoyed getting to know her outside, but I don't think it would be useful, as much as I would like to serve my community by being chair. There's always vice chair. I don't think it would be useful for me to throw my hat in the ring. I am very touched by the reminder that alliances in politics should not prevail when we make these decisions. And our newest commissioner reminded us that bullying and respect should go all ways and directions in this room. And I would like to add that when you have the privilege of serving on a board or commission and you sit up here in front of the people, you take an oath, you serve the staff and the council and the people of Palo Alto, you also should extend that same respect outside of this room, and that includes to comments made online. So I will be supporting Commissioner Templeton tonight for chair. I just want to make those comments. Okay, I appreciate those. If we could just keep it to questions for Commissioner Templeton, I think that's what we agreed to. So Commissioner Lowing?
Similar comment is in order now? That's what I thought. I thought you were changing it up.
That's fine, it's fine. Just Commissioner Lowing.
Well, I think on paper, in my view, a second-year commissioner is not a perfect profile for chair, unless they've had prior commission experience, for example, like Chair Riggs has in a different city. And why is obviously because it's a very steep learning curve. We've got zoning and building complexities, we've got key issues in the city and history around them, not to mention just the good old iconic Palo Alto process. And Carrie's a second-year commissioner, and I'm supporting her fully for chair. I think she's eager to, take the reins and lead the charge to make real progress on a lot of multiple issues we face. She wants to get things done, which I completely share that attitude. I also appreciate her preparation on issues this year, which shows her very dedicated and hardworking to jump on that learning curve and really come up that learning curve and help us. And I particularly I particularly have confidence in her meeting management, and I have zero questions I'm happy to say, about any sort of civility. And I hope that she is also mentoring all of us on that and monitoring all of us on that. And net, I would also like to just start this commission off this year with, a unified vote to select a leader, which is Carrie, to get us going, and let's go get stuff done for Palo Alto. Fully supportive.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioner. I want to call you Chair Lowing. Thank you. Any other comment, a question? We said questions, but I'll entertain additional comments as well, because I think that's what we're, any other questions? Okay. With that said, I think we're ready for a vote. So all in favor of the election of Commissioner Templeton as our 2020 chair? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so the motion carries 7-0. Thank you very much, and let's switch seats.
Well, thank you all. I am so touched and a little emotional right now, but I so appreciate the sense, the feeling that we're kicking it off, as Commissioner Lowing said, in a sense of goodwill and sharing the spirit that the community has put forward as well. I can safely say that every one of us shares the point of view that we are here to interact peacefully and move forward with making Palo Alto even better than it already is. So thank you very much for that. All right, now on to business. Any nominations for vice chair? Commissioner Lowing?
Yeah. Okay, I would like to nominate Doria Suma for vice chair.
And do you accept?
I do.
Any second?
Second? We need a second in order to debate it or discuss it.
Need a second.
Need a second to the nomination.
Are you asking me?
No, I'm asking if there is a second. And I believe you can second it yourself. Okay. The motion.
Is it somebody, oh, he put his light on.
Am I not lighting up?
Okay. Yes, Commissioner Heckman.
Sorry. So I will second for, at least so we can have discussions and questions and comments.
Thank you. All right, great. And do we have, do we back up our statements or take all nominations first? All right. So any other nominations?
I'll nominate at this time. Just for clarification purposes, you can also second your own nomination in case you were worried. You can also make your own nomination. Okay, at this time, I'd like to nominate Commissioner Rupavar.
Okay. Any second?
Any second?
Any second?
I'll second myself.
All right, we've got two nominations. Commissioner Lowing, do you want to speak to your nomination?
I'm sorry, I just can't hear very well if down there, if the mics are on.
I haven't started yet.
If multiple mics are on, it's actually hard to hear, like over here if you're over there.
I hadn't started yet, so. Okay, I just want to spend a couple of bullet points for everyone to understand, at least my view on this commission of what the vice chair does. In the public meetings, the responsibilities are very minor, and as it normally goes, the vice chair would only take the gavel probably once a year in the absence of the chair. Outside of the meeting, I think the role is significant. Obviously, there's a pre-meeting, and that's not just an hour every 2 weeks in City Hall up here talking with the planning department. The person has to be up to speed in detail on the packet by the Tuesday. Often, when I was chair on this commission, there was a pre-meeting for the pre-meeting with the vice chair so that we were really prepped, and often there was a post-meeting where we synced up to make sure that managing the meeting would be quite efficient. There are meetings with the chair. There are meetings with the mayor. There's interface with staff outside of meetings. There's retreat planning, and there can be assignments from the chair depending on what she wants to delegate. So just kind of get that in perspective. So why Doria? We've seen her perform for 3 years at, I think, an extraordinary level on PTC, and I would submit that that's only the tip of the iceberg, because that's what we see. She's really spent 20 years actively involved in the city of Palo Alto, working in city-involved issues, and I call her an avocational zoning expert, because she just really knows this stuff inside and out. Been president of her neighborhood association, a member of the very difficult comp plan advisory committee that was a predecessor to us finally voting on that plan, and takes on other tasks in addition to her PTC now, such as the NVCAP, the Ventura Working Group. So city work is really her passion. I think it's her main thing in life, and she'll invest any amount of time necessary, 24/7 in the role. And I presume she sees her husband occasionally. So I'm in recruiting, and so I always try to look at candidates and say, what's going to predict success here? Every single meeting that I've been in with her, which is all the ones that you've been in with her, there's evidence of just exhaustive, detailed preparation, and evidence that she's gone to other sources to get even more information, to both form her opinions as well as share with colleagues so that we can make better decisions. Her questions are very good and prepared in advance. Her positions are well argued at the meetings, clearly articulated in a nice, normal and civil way. She's an enthusiastic champion of thorough public input on issues like this and like everything. A real champion of the resident. Actively engaged in every debate, and I say that specifically because she's only missed one meeting in 3 years. So completely committed. Always very civil, listens to all colleagues before deciding how to vote, and her mind has changed sometimes by that. And the last thing I just want to mention in that regard is that she has very positive interactions with staff. A couple of comments I want to make apart from, I wrote this not thinking of another candidate in this regard. I just want to point that out. So these are not candidates on the merits of either the comments on the merits of either of the candidates. I think that Carrie, now the chair, needs a partner with lots of experience to work on the commission and the city process and so on. I think this will be better for PTC, and I think it's going to build confidence in our total leadership team within the community, which is really important. As you know from my last year comments, I personally don't feel that the election of the chair and vice chair should be politically based, because managing the commission's business really has nothing to do with voting on issues and doesn't influence it. But others in our community disagree with that premise. So I think that having Doria and Carrie work together is another benefit to the community of showing, sort of balance in political perspectives, perhaps, just as was just done on the council just a couple weeks ago. So you pick up that balance as well. And then 2 years ago, Doria stood for vice chair. She was tied in a vote with Susan Monk. Rather than leave that meeting in a stalemate, unprovoked, Doria graciously postponed her stint as vice and allowed Commissioner Monk to take the role. This is just what Councilmember Cormack did graciously in the vice mayor selection a couple weeks ago, with the clear promise that she would have a turn in the future. So I submit, for all the reasons, and particularly for the experience level that we get, now is the future for Doria in the last year of her term. So I think she's a great partner for our new chair. They worked well together in the past year. that Carrie will benefit from enormously from the decades of experience and her work ethic and her counsel.
Thank you, Commissioner Lowing. Commissioner Heckman, do you want to speak to your second?
So as I indicated at the time of the second, not realizing that a nominee could self-second, I wanted a dialogue, and I wanted to hear from the nominees, not knowing whether or not there'd be more than one. But now I know there are two. And so I'm looking at the community letter. Item number 3, thorough preparation for each agenda item, including knowledge of relevant background. And I will be candid that when I found out that this item was on our agenda tonight, my first meeting, and that if there were a contest, if there were more than one nominee for either position, I was going to be in a difficult spot because I don't have the knowledge of the relevant background. I don't have the background and experience of working with either of these two nominees. And so while I seconded this, and I think it's important that we hear from both nominees, I want to say up front that my intention is to abstain because I don't feel that I have sufficient knowledge of either nominee to choose between them. I appreciate the positive remarks from Ed, and I'm expecting to hear from Mike in regard to his nominee, and I expect that to be equally persuasive. So I think it'll be a tough decision, but I'm counting on 4 of my 6 fellow commissioners to choose one or the other.
Thank you. Commissioner Alchek, would you like to speak to your nomination?
Would. Thank you. Where do I begin? I was thrilled when I heard that Commissioner Rupavar was appointed to this commission. When I watched her interview, I was struck by the profound expertise she had in land use planning. For those of you unfamiliar, I'm a land use attorney, and in law school at the King Hall at Davis, I was a TA in California land use planning. And when I applied to law firms, there's only one firm when it comes to land use law in the United States, and that's the firm Miller, Starr, and Regalia. And in fact, any practicing land use attorney likely, maybe less now because of the digital age, will have a set of treatises behind their desk that they rely on profoundly when dealing with land use or municipal issues. And all of them have the authorship of Miller and Starr, the founders of Miller, Starr, and Regalia. I mention this because not only I didn't earn an offer of employment from Miller, Starr, and Regalia, despite trying very hard and interviewing with them. But regardless, in my professional experience, my interactions with that firm and my experience with their publication, with their founders' publication, was of remarkable expertise. And it may come as some surprise for those of you who don't know that Commissioner Rupavar not only did get an offer of employment from Miller and Starr, but she may be one of the youngest partners, or if not the youngest woman to make partner at Miller, Starr, and Regalia. And I have to tell you that for an attorney in land use, in the area of land use, to make partner at such a prestigious law firm suggests that she was a star. She was a star engaging with municipal employees, and she was a star engaging with communities and their constituents, and she was a star in helping clients achieve positive results in their what are always contentious land use issues. And so I didn't actually know you at all when you were appointed, but I was really impressed. I think that when the council, I think it was, I might be wrong, I think you were unanimously appointed by the council. I think you got every vote when you were appointed. which is also unique. And I think the reason that's the case is because there has been a realization, I think, among our council that expertise in the area of land use is helpful. I think the issues are getting more complex, and the polarization in our community is getting greater. And having individuals who sort of approach these issues from an arm's length, from an analytical perspective, who are familiar with not just the nature of the code that we consistently grapple with, but also with how it's often interpreted after we make our decisions. I think that's a big part of why why the council sought your perspective in these issues. I think that with Commissioner Heckman, I may have now served with 18 commissioners in the 8 or so years I've been on this commission. The overwhelming majority of them never got to have a leadership position on this commission. I think it's uncomfortable to have to pick between two candidates, and I think it's uncomfortable for a chair, for example, to have to pick between two vice chair candidates. And I think that regardless of how this vote goes, I think, I don't think it should be treated as like a personal vote of confidence or no confidence. I think that these are difficult and sort of tough decisions, but one does not necessarily mean that there's ill will. My point about the fact that the overwhelming majority of commissioners I've served with have never held a leadership position is just that all the points of view on this commission are equally weighted. And the role is well suited to individuals who are both trustworthy and strong meeting managers. And also, I think, especially in interacting with staff and behind the scenes, individuals that can help encourage the direction of the discussion in anticipation of tough meetings in a way that's most responsive to some of the important elements of these decisions that we make. And so I am equally excited that another individual with tremendous experience grappling with with code issues has joined this commission. We used to have an architect. Sometimes that's really valuable. I think we could probably benefit from someone with greater exposure to development. But the point is that the combination of your organizational management skills, your compassion, and your empathy in partnership with someone who has such tremendous and exceptional experience with many of the legal issues, I think would be profound. And I say that with all due respect to you, Commissioner Suma. And so I strongly support your appointment to this position and encourage all of you to support Commissioner Rupivar for the vice chair as well.
Thank you. Commissioner Rupivar, do you want to speak to your second? And then Commissioner Riggs.
Yes. I would be honored to have, to be elected vice chair and have the opportunity to take on greater responsibility and work with Commissioner Templeton. Thank you so much, Commissioner Olczak, for your vote of confidence in me. I do have 12 years of experience in this realm, as well as not only having appeared before, serving on the commission in Palo Alto, but I've appeared before planning commissions and city councils all across California and nationally in my practice outside of, my appearance here. But setting aside that expertise, what I vow and what I bring to the table that I think would be valuable is my ability to reach across the aisle and empathize. And that is why I was able to get the city council votes and why I have had good relationships with staff, because I do think that this position should transcend politics. And it's not about getting up here and arguing your point and making sure you win. It's about making sure that everybody is heard and has a fair chance, and making sure that there is civility and decorum that's always maintained. So for those reasons, I nominated myself as vice chair, and I am up to the job, and I can do it.
Thank you. Commissioner Riggs.
Well, I really appreciated Commissioner Lawling's generous description of your service, and I guess I want to echo that. I guess I have a question, though, because Commissioner Suma, I really appreciate your efforts and your preparation, but one thing is I'm really struggle with in supporting you is that last year in our retreat, when you chose not to participate, it really, I'd set up this event to try to build us as a team and to help us figure out how to work together more. And so I guess why I'm struggling with being able to support your experience is that I'm not exactly sure how do you recover from that gesture. I just don't, I want to hear how you will lead differently than that. So, I guess if you could speak to that, I'd really, really appreciate it, because it's weighed on me for a while.
Well, you could have reached out at any time to ask me, and to be honest, I did participate in the retreat. I stayed for the whole meeting, and some of the events that you planned I felt were somewhat frivolous and irrelevant to our mission, and I wanted to discuss how we could work together better. And in fact, the vice chair apologized to me after that meeting because he knew some of the little exercises we were going to do made me uncomfortable. So, it occurs to me that we could have spoken about this a year ago. A simple invitation to coffee would have been meaningful to me.
Doria, did you want to say anything about your nomination?
No, thank you, Commissioner Lowing. That was a little over the top. I can assure everyone in the room I do not think about zoning 24/7. That's just not true. I also think that I have lived in this community for a very long time and worked very hard, and I think I will be an excellent vice chair. I think I have the time to do it. I am not employed outside of the home, as they say, and my various pursuits with the city. So I think I'm going to be able to assist you better in your role than anyone who has a job. I'm sure that any one of us here can do an excellent job as vice chair. It's just a matter of who's going to do it this year. So I would like that to be me. I hope some of you besides Ed will. I don't want to spend too much time on it. I do think the decorum is very important, and satisfying our responsibility to staff and the public. And I just want to reiterate something I said earlier, and for me that doesn't stop in this room, not up here or in this room. I take that out into the world with me. I don't tweet things, I don't Instagram, I don't write Facebook posts, I don't do things like that. And I just wanted to make that clear. I think I will be excellent, and I think I'll have more time to do it to help you, really. Because I do think it's a pretty big job, actually. And I think you won't miss a single meeting, because I don't think you do miss meetings. So I don't think, it's not for me about holding the gavel and sitting in your seat. It's about actually working with you and helping you, which we have done very well this year. So thank you very much.
Any other comments? I will be participating in this vote, and I echo the comments about how lucky we are to have two amazing nominees. I have learned a lot working with Doria, and I have also learned a lot working, with Commissioner Suma, and I've learned a lot working with Commissioner Rupavar. So I think there are some additional considerations about the dynamic and the pairing that my personal preference, I think would work better with Commissioner Rupavar, so I'll be supporting her nomination. All right, so we're going to vote in the order of nomination. So, when we have, when it's two people, do we vote one or the other, or do we vote up and down for each candidate?
You can up and down for both candidates.
Each candidate.
Okay, great, thank you. So let's vote for Commissioner Suma for vice chair. Thank you. Opposed?
No.
Oh, you don't do opposed? Okay, then for Commissioner Rupavar for vice chair. Any abstentions? Okay, well, thank you for being willing to serve for both of you, and congratulations, Vice Chair Rupavar.
Did we have to have 4? I thought that's what it said.
Commissioner,
That's
under
an excellent
under the procedural rules, commissioners who abstain but are not disqualified vote with the majority, and the majority on that vote was the 3. So it's essentially, your votes go with the 3 who voted for Commissioner Rupavar.
Thanks for the clarification.
Thank you. Right. Any other business, or is that the last item? All right. Then the meeting is adjourned at 8:14. Thank you.